Let's start with the job nobody wanted. In March 1982, Randy Rhoads, the most exciting young guitarist in rock, died in a plane crash while on tour with Ozzy. He was 25 years old. The tour had to continue. Ozzy was in pieces. The fans were in pieces. And into that wreckage walked Brad Gillis, a guitarist from Night Ranger, handed a set list full of Randy's parts and an audience that was still actively grieving. Every night, Brad walked on stage to play solos that fans had just lost the creator of, not a replacement in any normal sense, more like a man holding a torch at a funeral procession. He was competent, professional, and absolutely doomed from the start. Nobody was ever going to cheer. Nobody was ever going to compare him favorably. The only job harder than replacing a legend is replacing one who just died. Brad Gillis got that job. And then came the permanent replacement. Could anyone have survived replacing Randy Rhoads? That was the question hanging over Jake E. Lee before he'd played a single note for Ozzy. The answer, it turns out, is kind of, but not really, and definitely not without scars. Jake was a genuinely brilliant guitarist. The work he did on Bark at the Moon is seriously underrated, but the fan base had already decided the outcome before he walked in the door. Every review compared him to Randy. Every interview asked about Randy. Every show was a referendum on whether he was good enough to stand where Randy had stood. He wasn't allowed to just be a guitarist. He was a replacement, full stop. The comparisons never stopped. The resentment from a section of the fan base never fully lifted. Jake has spoken in interviews about how damaging the whole experience was. Replacing a legend is hard. Replacing a dead legend is something else entirely. He replaced a guitar god, and the band collapsed around him. Ritchie Blackmore leaving Deep Purple in 1975 was already a catastrophe for the fanbase. The man was one of the architects of hard rock, basically irreplaceable by definition. The band pressed on anyway and hired Tommy Bolin, a gifted American guitarist with a bluesy, funk-influenced style that was genuinely impressive and absolutely nothing like Blackmore, which, to a fan base that wanted Blackmore back, was practically a personal insult. Critics savaged the Come Taste the Band album. Fans booed at shows. And all of this while Bolin was quietly fighting a serious drug addiction that nobody around him seemed able or willing to confront. He died of an overdose in December 1976, at 25 years old, less than a year after joining the band. Deep Purple disbanded shortly after. Tommy Bolin didn't just fail to replace Ritchie Blackmore, he never really got a fair chance to try. The guitarist who helped save Kiss and nearly destroyed it too. When Ace Frehley left in 1982, Kiss didn't just lose a guitarist. They lost one of the four faces that defined the band's entire identity. The Spaceman was as much a part of Kiss as the makeup itself. Enter Vinnie Vincent, who was genuinely talented, genuinely creative, and genuinely an absolute nightmare to deal with. He co-wrote some serious material. I Love It Loud, Lick It Up, and helped push Kiss through the difficult transition away from the makeup era. Then the ego wars started. Contract disputes, claims over songwriting royalties, demands that couldn't be met. Gene and Paul eventually fired him, sued him, and spent years publicly feuding with him. Vinnie went on to start and implode several subsequent bands with impressive consistency. His replacement tenure lasted barely 2 years. In Kiss world, that might actually be a record for destructive efficiency.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the guitarist,
30 years later, and fans still argue about this replacement. When Adrian Smith left Iron Maiden in 1990, it created a fault line in the fan base that has never fully closed. Adrian wasn't just popular, he was beloved. Co-writer of some of Maiden's most iconic material, a guitarist whose melodic sensibility was woven into the band's DNA, Janick Gers, who replaced him, is by any objective measure an exceptional guitarist. Energetic, technically accomplished, visually entertaining on stage. Didn't matter. A significant portion of the Maiden faithful had already decided the verdict. Online forums have been relitigating this decision. Since before online forums were even a thing, the fact that Adrian eventually returned in 1999, turning Maiden into a rare three-guitar band, technically resolved the situation, but it didn't end the debate. Even today, Janick remains the one some fans quietly wish would make room. In Maiden world, you're either original or you're on trial forever. Replacing genius might be the hardest job in rock, and Gary Moore found that out at 17 years old. Peter Green wasn't merely Fleetwood Mac's guitarist. He was their soul, their identity, their reason for existing. A player whose tone and emotional depth had already marked him as one of the most gifted musicians of his generation. When Green's mental health deteriorated and he left the band in 1970, the first emergency cover option was Gary Moore, still a teenager stepping into one of the most impossible gigs in British rock. He played a handful of shows, did what he could, and was quietly moved on when the situation stabilized with other replacements. The real legacy of this story isn't failure in the traditional sense. Moore went on to a brilliant solo career. It's more that Peter Green had created something so personal and so irreducibly his own. That made the very concept of a replacement almost philosophically absurd. He made the Stones better and replaced one of rock's most tragic legends. Brian Jones founded the Rolling Stones. He named them. He shaped their early identity. By 1969, he was a wreck, fired by his own band, dead in a swimming pool weeks later at 27. Into that particular storm walked Mick Taylor, a 20-year-old blues prodigy from John Mayall's Blues Breakers, who did something remarkable. He actually improved the band. His playing on Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, and Exile on Main Street is extraordinary. Fluid, sophisticated, pushing the Stones into musical territory they'd never have reached with Jones. Critics loved him. The albums from his tenure are among the greatest in rock history, and yet, the shadow of how he arrived, the circumstances, the tragedy, the founding member dead in a pool meant the story was always going to be complicated. He quit in 1974 quietly and without explanation. Nobody's ever fully believed the official reasons. Better guitarist or better Stone? That's the argument that's been running since 1975, and frankly, nobody's close to settling it. When Mick Taylor left, the Stones needed a replacement, and after an audition process that reportedly included Jeff Beck and Harvey Mandel, they landed on Ronnie Wood, then still officially a member of the Faces. Ronnie brought something Taylor never quite had: chemistry. He slotted into the Glimmer Twins dynamic like he'd always been there, a natural foil for Keith.
Once more, she's fast asleep, leave you twinkling with stars.
Loose and fun and sociable in all the ways the Stones needed someone to be. But critics were quick to point out that the musical precision of the Taylor era was gone. The solos got bluesier, rougher, less refined. Some said the band became more of a gang and less of a band. Ronnie Wood has now been a Rolling Stone for 50 years, longer than any of the founding members lasted together. Still called a replacement by a certain type of fan. Make of that what you will.
I've been good while I've been waiting, maybe guilty of hesitating.
The impossible task. After the impossible task. To understand how difficult John Sykes' position was, you need to appreciate what Gary Moore had already been through. Moore himself had joined Thin Lizzy in a crisis, stepping in during the band's turmoil years and helping deliver some of their finest work before leaving, returning, and leaving again in a cycle that became its own drama. By the time John Sykes arrived in 1983, Thin Lizzy were essentially collapsing. Phil Lynnett's health was deteriorating. The energy that had defined the band was running out. Sykes was talented. His later work with Whitesnake would prove that convincingly. But no amount of talent was going to save a band that was already fading from the inside. The last Lizzy album under Sykes, Thunder, and Lightning is actually pretty good. But Pretty Good Farewell album is a long way from what fans had wanted. Phil Lynott died in 1986. The impossible task had always been unwinnable. Did history forget the original Yes guitarist? Ask a Yes fan who Peter Banks is, and you'll get one of two reactions: a knowing nod or a slightly embarrassed pause. Banks was a founder of Yes, part of the original lineup that established the band's sound and identity. He was also quietly shown the door in 1970 and replaced by Steve Howe, a guitarist so staggeringly good, so perfectly suited to the progressive ambitions Yes were chasing, that he essentially rewrote what the band could be. And that's the problem for Banks' legacy. Howe didn't just take the job. He elevated the band to a different level entirely. Close, To the Edge, Fragile, the Yes album. Records that defined progressive rock and made Banks' era sound like a warm-up. It's not really a failure story. It's more of an erasure story. Peter Banks played his part and got written out of the narrative by a replacement who turned out to be one of the greatest rock guitarists who ever lived. History isn't always fair. Ask Peter Banks. So there you have it. 10 guitarists handed impossible jobs and judged accordingly. Some were genuinely brilliant. Some were disasters waiting to happen. Some never stood a chance from the moment they plugged in. But here's the thing nobody mentions. Every single one of them showed up anyway. And that takes a certain kind of nerve. Who do you think had the hardest replacement gig in rock history? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if classic rock runs through your veins, you know what to do.
Once more, she's fast asleep, leave you twinkling